At sunrise on August 30, 1776, British soldiers advanced toward the American defenses on Brooklyn Heights expecting a final fight. The campfires were still burning. Artillery still faced the approaches. The earthworks looked occupied. Yet when the British entered, the trenches were almost silent. George Washington was gone. So were thousands of Continental soldiers. There was no bridge behind them. The East River blocked their retreat. British troops controlled the land approaches, and the Royal Navy dominated the harbor. By every reasonable calculation, Washington's army should have been trapped. Instead, an entire army had vanished. How could nearly 9,000 men escape from a position surrounded by soldiers, ships, mud, darkness, and a fast tidal river? The answer begins 3 nights earlier, on a road almost no one believed needed serious protection. In the summer of 1776, New York was one of the most dangerous places in North America to defend. The city occupied the lower end of Manhattan, with Long Island to the east, New Jersey to the west, and deep waterways cutting between every major position. The same geography that made New York commercially valuable made it a military nightmare. Whoever controlled the harbor could move troops between islands, threaten several landing sites at once, and force the defender to guess where the real attack would come. Britain controlled the harbor. After the British evacuation of Boston in March 1776, George Washington moved much of the Continental Army toward New York. He understood that the city could become the center of the next campaign. British ships could use it as a base. The Hudson River offered a route north. If Britain controlled the river corridor, New England might be separated from the colonies farther south. Politically, the Americans also feared the humiliation of abandoning a major city shortly after declaring independence. But Washington had no way to defend every possible approach. If he concentrated soldiers in Brooklyn, the British could attack Manhattan. If he held too many men in Manhattan, Long Island could fall. If he divided his force, both sides might be too weak. He was not defending one city. He was defending several connected islands against an enemy that could move by water faster than he could move by road. On July 2, British forces began landing on Staten Island. More ships appeared almost every day. Masts crowded the harbor. Transports carried infantry, artillery, horses, food, tents, and ammunition. General William Howe commanded the army. His brother, Admiral Richard Howe, commanded the fleet. Together they possessed a larger and more professional force than Washington could match. 2 days later, on July 4, Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. The timing could not have been more dramatic. The colonies announced that they were free while the British Empire assembled the force intended to prove that independence was impossible. For weeks, Washington waited. British ships shifted position. Boats approached shorelines and withdrew. Rumors suggested attacks on Manhattan, Long Island, the Hudson, and the New Jersey side of the harbor. Every report might be true, false, or intentionally planted. Washington could see the invasion building, but he could not force it to reveal its target. He strengthened the fortifications on Brooklyn Heights, protecting the ferry landing across from Manhattan. Farther south and east, American troops watched a wooded ridge known as the Heights of Guan. Several roads crossed that ridge. The Gowanus Road passed near the western end. The Flatbush and Bedford roads crossed farther east. Beyond them lay Jamaica Pass. The defensive idea seemed reasonable. Troops posted along the ridge would delay the British before they reached the stronger lines on Brooklyn Heights. But the front was long, the woods limited visibility, and the Americans did not have enough men to guard every road equally. Jamaica Pass appeared distant from the most likely battlefield. It was watched by only a tiny mounted patrol. That decision would shape the entire campaign. What if Washington had placed one full regiment there? What if mounted scouts had patrolled farther east? What if one messenger had reached headquarters before dawn? The British plan depended on more than strength. It depended on one road remaining open and one American assumption remaining unchallenged. On August 22, British troops began landing at Gravesend Bay on southwestern Long Island. The landing was orderly and largely unopposed. Boats carried soldiers from the transports to shore. Regiments formed and moved inland. Washington received the news but still could not know whether this was the main attack or a diversion. The British fleet remained capable of striking somewhere else. He sent reinforcements to Brooklyn, but he did not transfer the entire army. The British advanced toward Flatbush and stopped. For several days, the two sides skirmished and watched one another. American soldiers could see British and Hessian camps beyond the fields. Officers waited for a frontal assault against the main roads. Then the American command suffered an unexpected setback. Major General Nathaniel Greene, who had studied the terrain and supervised much of the defensive work, became seriously ill. Israel Putnam assumed overall command on Long Island. John Sullivan and William Alexander, known as Lord Stirling, controlled important parts of the forward line. The officers were experienced, but Greene's detailed knowledge of the ground could not be transferred instantly. Responsibility was divided. Troops moved between positions. Reports arrived late or without context. The wooded ridge was now being defended by men who did not all share the same understanding of the battlefield. The attack would operate like a closing hand. On the British left, General James Grant would advance near the Gowanus Road, threatening the American right. In the center, Hessian troops under Leopold von Heister would pressure the Flatbush area. Far to the east, the main British column, roughly 10,000 men under Clinton, Cornwallis, Percy, and Howe, would march through Jamaica Pass, emerge behind the Americans, and cut the roads leading back toward Brooklyn Heights. The visible attacks would hold the defenders in place. The hidden march would destroy them. On the evening of August 26, the British camps appeared active, but no general assault had begun. American soldiers watched the roads in front of them. Some heard movement near the western flank. Patrols reported what they could see. Around 9 o'clock that night, the main British column began moving east and then north through the Long Island countryside. Thousands of soldiers marched in darkness. Officers tried to keep the column quiet. Loyalist guides led the way. The men carried equipment and weapons along narrow roads, knowing that surprise mattered more than speed. On the western side of the field, Grant's force advanced toward the Gowanus Road. Firing began during the night. The sound reinforced what the Americans already expected: the British main effort seemed to be forming on the right. Lord Stirling moved toward the threat. The deception was working. At about 3 o'clock in the morning on August 27, Clinton's advance reached Jamaica Pass. Only a handful of mounted American militiamen guarded the route. They were captured before they could give an effective warning. The road was open. British light infantry passed through first. Grenadiers and line regiments followed. By dawn, the column had crossed the wooded ridge and emerged behind the American forward positions. Then thousands of British soldiers stopped and waited. That silence may have been the most dangerous moment of the battle. The American troops still faced south. Grant pressed from the west. The Hessians remained visible near Flatbush. Every obvious threat stood in front of the American line. Yet beyond the ridge, unseen, the largest British force on the island was already positioned along the roads leading toward the American rear. Washington crossed from Manhattan to Brooklyn as reports began arriving. From the heights, he could see smoke and movement, but the woods concealed much of the battlefield. No single officer possessed a complete picture. The Americans were preparing to fight an enemy they could see while the decisive force waited in a place they believed was safe. At approximately 9 o'clock, 2 British cannon fired. The signal released the flanking column. British troops advanced toward Bedford. Hessian units moved from the front. Grant increased pressure against Stirling. American soldiers suddenly encountered red-coated troops on roads they had expected to use for retreat. Some fought through the woods. Some became separated from their officers. Others ran toward Brooklyn Heights without knowing which route remained open. John Sullivan tried to organize resistance, but the American left and center began to collapse. The first major battle after independence was no longer about holding New York. It was about whether the army of the new United States could escape its first great trap. And on the American right, Lord Stirling was still fighting what he believed was the main battle. He had not yet learned that the British were already behind him. The danger was visible even before the battle began. From rooftops and church towers, civilians watched the harbor fill with sails. Merchants packed goods. Families debated whether to remain, flee, or wait for British protection. Loyalists expected the King's army to restore order. Patriots listened for alarms and tried to believe the new nation could survive its first test. New York had become a city waiting for an attack that could arrive from almost any direction. Washington's written returns reveal why he remained uncertain. The number of men listed on paper was larger than the number actually ready to fight. Illness, detached duty, missing equipment, and incomplete training reduced the force available at any one position. Some units were militia serving for limited periods. Others had only recently joined the Continental Army. Even when Washington knew the British were on Long Island, he could not treat Manhattan as safe. The Royal Navy could carry soldiers to another landing point faster than the Americans could shift their defense overland. That uncertainty gave Howe an advantage more powerful than numbers. He could threaten several places while intending to attack only one. Each American reinforcement sent toward Brooklyn weakened another possible target. Each hour Washington waited increased the danger on Long Island. Yet a premature concentration could have allowed the British to land above Manhattan and cut off the city. The problem was not simply that Washington guessed incorrectly. It was that the British controlled when he had to guess. What if the Americans possessed a reliable network of mounted scouts extending beyond Jamaica Pass? What if Greene had remained healthy and retained command of the ground he had studied? No single change guarantees a different outcome, but the British plan required several American weaknesses to exist at the same time: divided command, limited reconnaissance, uncertainty about the main landing, and one distant road watched by almost no one. By the night of August 26, every one of those conditions was in place. In the next part, the trap will close completely. Sullivan will disappear into captivity. Stirling will turn a small force toward a much larger enemy. Several hundred Maryland soldiers will attack near a stone house, not because they expect to win, but because every minute they survive may allow someone else to escape. Washington will watch his army collapse in front of him. Then, at the moment Britain appears ready to finish the revolution, General Howe will make a decision that historians still debate. He will stop. What if he had not?